Okay, so when I started this, I had two people in mind. One, well, actually three people. One for people who are really interested in understanding the biblical text much better. They want to get deeper, pull out more treasures from it. So that was one of the, because there's a lot into scripture and there are things that we can miss. So those who are interested is like, how can I dig more deeper into scripture? Second group was young people. I've developed a heart over the years for young people. Part of it is called Ebony, your mom, working a lot with young people, and just seeing that there are young people who really need to better understand how to study God's word. So just letting some people in here. So we wanted to get those, we wanted to reach out to young people, which we're doing. And also we wanted to reach out to young people and ministers, pastors who are teaching who may not be able to go back to school because it costs thousands of dollars now. I mean, a lot of money to go back to school to get a degree in biblical studies. I was fortunate; I got my degree many, many, many moons ago, and it didn't cost as much when I got mine. But it's a lot more expensive now. And to all those who are coming in, welcome. We're glad you're here with us. And so I wanted to be able to provide something for people that where they can come and learn how the tools that can really help them to get the most out of studying the scriptures. So this is again for three people: pastors, ministers, people who are teaching God's word, and they want to make sure they do a good job at it. Number two, young people. We see a lot of young people starting to study the Bible now. I see young people on YouTube. I see young people. I just got on TikTok, so I'm starting to see people on TikTok, and I'm hearing them same things. I'm going like, oh no, 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 that's not correct. And also, like we said, people who just say, I just want to be able to understand the Bible better when I'm studying it and reading it. So that's who this is really for. And what this class is kind of a taste of what's going to be coming. At the end of the class today, we're going to be talking about a class we're going to be launching. I'll give you the dates for that, but it's called How to Study the Bible for a Change, or How to Study the Bible, pause, for a Change. And we're going to be looking at what are the tools, what's the mindset that you need to have when you are studying? What tools do you need when you're studying? And in that class, we're going to go deep into it. What this class is for is to give you a taste of that. Okay. So for those of you who are coming on, I know most of you probably already know me. If not, my name is Mike Davis. I am, I guess you could say, many things. I am a coach. I am a corporate consultant and trainer. I am a dad. I've got three daughters. I'm a grandfather. I have five grandkids, but I love to study and teach the Bible. I'm 60 years old. I've been a Christian since I was 14 years old, and I've always just had a great love for scripture. And what happened when I was about 24 years of age, my wife, she was 23. We underwent something where we really started to delve more deeply into the scriptures, studying the scriptures in terms of history and culture and language, and it changed our lives. It absolutely changed our lives. So over the years, as we learned, we wanted to share more of that with people. And so we started an organization called the Center for Christian Training and Development. And the purpose of that ministry is to do two things: help people to understand the Bible better, and also to help them to renew their mind to the Bible, to renew their mind to the truths of Scripture. It's not enough just to have information. You got to have transformation. You want to be transformed by what you are reading. So that's what that's what we seek to do in our organization, the Center for Christian Training and Development. We want you to understand the biblical text as deeply as possible. I always said, especially as a pastor, I've always said I want our congregation to be one of the most educated congregations around, not just with intellectual knowledge, but also that they're studying and their lives are being transformed. So that's what we're about. So today we're going to be talking about what I call the power of context. Let me bring up my slides. And I just want you to know my slides are pretty simple. Okay. And let's see, make sure I can see everybody here. Oops, hang on. Here we go. So everybody, if you can see the slides, just nod your head. Okay, everybody can see the slides. Cool. Okay, so I just want you to know I did these slides, and when they look simple and just plain, that means I did them. There are times you're going to come on, if you join us in our future classes, they're going to look beautiful. That means my wife did them. Okay. So just wanted to be clear about that. I didn't get her all the slides in time so she could work on this, but she's already had it. And she's like, okay, yeah, we need to change this. So, but this, as I said, this is a taste of what is coming. The slides will be much more beautiful. So we're going to talk about the power of context, and we're going to talk about Jesus and the Syro-Phoenician or slash Canaanite woman. Now you can find this story in two places. You can find it. Let me turn on my timer here to make sure I stay on time. You can find the story in two places: Matthew chapter 15, verse 21 through 28, Mark chapter 7, verse 24 through 30. Now, you can utilize the Bible through the study if you want. I got practically everything that we are going to be looking at on screen, and I did that so I wouldn't have to be kind of turning to different pages. It takes a while to do that. But if you want to follow along with your own Bible, feel free to do that. We're going to be looking at, how many of you have heard of this story? Or you read this story about the Syro-Phoenician woman, the Canaanite woman, right? Okay. I want you to think about things that you've heard about this story. We're going to talk about it. Here's the first place where we see it is in Matthew chapter 15, verse 21 through 28. It says, then Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. My daughter is severely demon possessed. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, send her away, for she cries out after us. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then she came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. And she said, yes, Lord. Yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. And then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be to you as you desire. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. All right. Then we have Mark's version. It's pretty much the same. There's a little bit of difference in this. Mark has a little bit shorter version. In Mark's version, it says in verse 26, the woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician. So he doesn't just say she was from Canaan or Canaanite. She was a Greek. She a Syro-Phoenician by birth. And she kept asking him, Jesus, to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, let the children first be filled, for it's not good to take this children's bread and throw it to dogs. We read that. Then in verse 29, Mark reads just a little bit differently. In Matthew's version, it says, O woman, great is your faith. Be it unto you as you will, or as you desire. Mark says and ends it like this. Then he said to her, for this saying, when she said, yes, Lord, even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. He said to her, for this saying, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter. Okay. So pretty much the same things, some things a little bit different, but there has been some controversy over this story. There's been some controversy because of how Jesus responded to the woman and the statements that he said to her. There are even some scholars who think that Jesus was being insulting to this woman. As a matter of fact, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. Let me ask a question of everyone. How many of you have ever had a difficulty in reading this story? It's like, what in the world is, yeah, okay. I'm seeing hand raised here. And we have a chat. If you want to write over into a chat, you can just write over in the chat. Yeah, Mike, I've had some problems with this story also. This story can be a little bit confusing. And even to scholars, a lot of scholars have looked at this story and they have struggled with the story. They've struggled with what Jesus was saying to the woman. So what we're going to do is start to look at this story in depth, in detail, to try to understand where it's coming from. So I'm going back to slides here again. So let's start looking at this story. Let me share with you first some of the things that have been said about this passage by scholars. There's one scholar by the name of Gail O'Day in a article that she wrote for a book called A Feminist Companion to Matthew. It's called Surprised by Faith. She wrote that Jesus turns his back on her, the woman, and her need. This is how one scholar has understood this. Jesus was turning his back on her and her need. Another scholar by the name of Stevenson Humphreys Brooks, he wrote, the story of the Canaanite woman shows that Jesus himself can initially fail to perceive faith and thereby refuse access to the kingdom to those whom he was sent. Jesus, an Israelite man, allows himself, now, no, this is what a scholar has said. Jesus, an Israelite man, allows himself to be duped by the appearance of this supplicant as a woman and a non-Israelite. So these two people feel like Jesus turned his back on her. One of them said Jesus allowed himself because he was a man, he was an Israelite man, he was duped, and he didn't want to help her because she was a woman and because she was a non-Israelite. Another quote again from Gail O'Day. She said that the Canaanite woman in the story, she gets the better of Jesus in an argument, and Jesus changes his mind. And then Stevenson Humphrey's book said that the woman proves to be a better theologian than Jesus himself. Now, for those of you and for those of us who like, well, we believe Jesus is the Son of God. We believe he's God manifest in the flesh. We read this, we're like, huh? What do you mean? But again, people have struggled with this, and these are ways that they've tried to make sense of this passage. Now, I want to say that what I'm not trying to do is be disparaging of these scholars. And so we're not trying to put them down. And Rosie, I see your question. Rosie said, I wonder why he would say to the woman what he meant by referring to her as a dog. We're going to cover that. Has anybody ever been wondered, like, why did Jesus call this woman a dog? Anybody ever think about that? Okay, cool, great. We're going to talk about that. So on the surface reading of this text, it does appear that the above scholars that we just looked at, that they might be right in their assessment of Jesus and the Canaanite woman. I mean, the woman comes to him, he doesn't answer her a word. He turns from her, she keeps coming, and then he says, I'm only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It's like he's denying her again. And she's like, Lord, help me. And the disciples like, Lord, send this woman away. And it could be that they were saying, help her and then send her away. And Jesus says, it's not good to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. It just looks like Jesus is being rude and insulting on the surface of the text. All right. That's what it can look like. But as we go into this, I don't want to go into this yet. These are some ways that people, because this is a difficult text. This is why I'm not trying to put down these scholars or speak disparagingly of them. This is a difficult text. All right. This is how some Christians who believe in Jesus, believe he's the Son of God, they're like, this is how they've tried to explain it. I've listened to, I don't know how many sermons this past week on this passage. And I've listened from different perspectives, and I've heard a lot of different things. I was telling my wife before we came on tonight, I was thinking, man, it's amazing the interpretations that people give to this text and how they try to make sense of it. And again, I don't mean that as a put down. They're struggling to try to understand this text. This is how others have tried to explain it. Jesus was talking about household pets, and the woman agreed that you don't give the children's bread to the dogs or you don't give it to the pets, but that even the little dogs get to eat the crumbs. So she assented to what Jesus said. This is one explanation I heard. Several people said this. She accepted that she was a Gentile sinner, but could receive God's mercy like puppies receive crumbs. Okay, that's one interpretation. Another one was this was merely a test of the woman's faith and sincerity, like the story of the persistent widow and the judge in Luke chapter 18, verse 1. This is the one where the woman is coming to the judge and said, give me justice. And she keeps coming back. And the judge is like, let me respond to this woman or else she's going to wear me out coming day and night. So there are those who believe that's what this is. Jesus was testing the woman's faith, testing her sincerity, like the story of the persistent widow and the judge in Luke 18. He was testing this woman, and the woman showed her persistent faith. And that sounds plausible, except when you think about it, it's like Jesus didn't do this to anyone else. We don't see anyone else 3 times where Jesus is going, he looks like he's rejecting her. We don't see this anywhere else. Here's another one. Jesus, and I heard, I won't mention the name, but I heard somebody say this one. Jesus calling the woman a dog is only insulting if you think you are not a dog, that is, a sinner. But if it is true that you're a sinner, therefore a dog, it's not an insult. This entire story is a picture to teach us how to come to God for salvation with humility. So one interpretation of this is that, hey, Jesus was not insulting her. He was just making he was just stating the facts. Hey, you're a dog. That is, you're a sinner. And you only think it's insulting. Like some people say, hey, you're a worm, right? Like some people say, I'm just a worm before God. I don't deserve anything. That was what this person was coming from. Now, these interpretations make it a little bit easier, but in my opinion, it is not by much that it makes it easier when you really think about it. First of all, if Jesus is calling the woman a dog, there are those who say, well, Jesus wasn't calling her a dog like the big dogs of that day who were scavengers. This was talking about a little dog, like a puppy, that people had in their homes. And I thought about that, and I heard someone say something. I thought it's really true. They said, or I read something, and they said, calling her a little dog that can receive crumbs, that's still insulting. That's like the difference between saying to somebody, you're a pig. It's like, okay, well, we want to soften it. We don't want you to be insulted. Okay, you're a little pig. You're a piggy. It's still insulting. It's still insulting. All right. But there are those who feel like, yeah, what he was saying she was like a puppy and the puppies received. I think, but it's still saying that she's a dog and she has to eat the crumbs. Okay. Also, many interpret this as teaching that we all come to Christ and we receive his mercy and grace in order to be forgiven and saved. And they said, this is what this story is teaching us. This is what Jesus was trying to show us. This is why Matthew put this there. It is a way of showing us that everyone can come to Christ, even a Canaanite woman. Everyone can come to Christ. Everyone can be forgiven because this woman was a non-Israelite and everyone was thinking that only Jews could be saved. So this shows us that even a Gentile, all Gentiles can be saved. And they'll say, this is what we see in the teachings of Paul. This is what we see in Acts chapter 10 with Peter and Cornelius. And while that is true, that's a theological truth. This story is not about forgiveness of sin, nor is it about eternal salvation. So I hear people trying, when I saw people and I was listening to people talk about this, and he was trying, and when they were teaching it, they were saying that, well, Jesus was really just trying to teach everybody about forgiveness and that it's open to everyone. I said, but that's not what the story is about. The story is not this woman was not asking for eternal life. She was asking for her daughter to be delivered from a demonic spirit. So this story is not about eternal salvation. As true as it is that it's open to everyone, that's not what this story is about, because that's not what she was asking for. Okay. Now, also, too, what people will say, well, he was really calling her a little dog, so it really wasn't that big. He was referring to puppies, household pets. This is what a scholar by the name of Craig Keener, in his work, the Gospel of Matthew, he said, in both Gospels, Matthew and Mark, Jesus probably refers to the children's pet dogs. Well-to-do Greeks, unlike most Jews, could raise dogs as pets and not view them as merely troublesome rodents. This image is thus simply one of children's needs. So it is true that in the ancient world, among the well-to-do Greeks, they would have dogs as pets, okay? But then he goes on to say, such an omission, however, hardly transformed the image into a compliment. The image was an unpleasant one, and dog was an insult in the earliest extant pagan tradition, as was its female derivative. Dogs were known for their attachment to dung and sniffing other dogs' rear ends. This is why dogs were often seen as unclean. And also, if you have a Jew calling a Gentile, because within Judaism, they sometimes did refer to Gentiles as dogs, and it was an insult. If you have a Jew, Jesus is Jewish, and he's talking to this Canaanite woman, and if he is referring to her as a dog, even a little dog, it still is going to come off as an insult. It's still going to have some sting and bite to it. So that's why I said, though there's been some ways of trying to interpret this to soften Jesus' words or to make it seem like what Jesus really wasn't insulting her, it still doesn't make it better. It still is going to be looked upon as a insult, okay? So what I want to propose is that there is a different way of reading this text. There's a different interpretation than that given by the scholars and some of the pastors that I saw on YouTube talk about this. The key to understanding this text is reading the text in a specific context. Now, for those of you that will be taking our class, you're going to be hearing the word context often. You would constantly hear me say context, context, context. Like Charles is here. Charles has been in some of the classes I've done. Charles, do I use context a lot?
Yes.
Yeah. I use the
Keep
word.
your YouTube channel is called Keep It in Context.
Yeah, our YouTube channel is called Keeping It in Context. Okay. So yeah, I use the word context a lot, but that's because there are certain contexts, and so what we want to pay attention to is the context in which we should be reading specifically the words of Jesus and the Gospels. And I believe that the context, the proper context, is a Jewish or rabbinic context of the first century, a first century Jewish rabbinic context. When we start to look at this story in a first century Jewish and rabbinic context, we begin to see this story differently and we begin to read it differently. So what do we need to do first? First of all, one of the first things we need to do as we start to read is we need to be aware of, we need to pay close attention to what the text is saying and what the text is not saying. All right, everybody with me so far? When we're reading this text, we need to pay attention. What is that we need to be aware of, and we need to pay attention to what the text is saying and what the text is not saying. So here's the story again. You know, Jesus comes out. This is the Matthew's version. And in verse 23, you know, the woman says, Lord, son of David, my daughter is severely depressed. Jesus doesn't answer her. And then in verse 26, Jesus answered and said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Now, let me ask you this question. Where in this text does Jesus call her a dog? Anyone? Let me take a moment, look at this text. This is from Matthew chapter 15. And remember, what we want to do is pay attention. We want to be aware of what the text is saying and what the text is not saying. All right, everybody looking at this text? All right, I'm going to tear it off for a second. So let me ask you, where did Jesus say you are a dog?
Well,
Charles is shaking his head.
to me, it's saying when he's telling her, she asks him a question, and then he's saying, "We don't throw it to the dog." So, in other words, to me, it's like she's calling her a dog because I'm not gonna give you what is for the Jewish people, for the children. It's to me, it's calling her a dog or her daughter.
Okay, good. Thank you, Rosie. Good. Okay, so let me go. Anybody else want to say something before I pull the slides back up?
I don't I don't think he said it at all, like, period. I believe, like, in the text, verse 27, it says, like, the little dogs, like, get the crumbles.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe that, like, sometimes what happens is that in our own identity, like, we would feel that this is how we would feel, and yet we're not truly, like, understanding to saying, okay, but what do you say? Because it happened to Adam and Eve, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she got deceived, and she's like, well, I'm not too sure because these questions are coming up. And so
Mm-hmm.
she's believing, like, hey, okay, well, you maybe, you know what, that does look good to my eye. And so since I don't know what the father has said, even though the father has told Adam, it's just like this whole thing. And so it's like with the little crumble, like she's believing, like, hey, like these little dogs, like I'm like feeling like a little dog because like I'm taking whatever that I can. But in reality, he's not saying anything like that at all.
Yeah,
Like he's not telling her that, like, period. It's just there's like a little glimpse of that.
good. And this is Seek God. And who is this?
Oh, sorry, my name's Brienne.
Brienne? Thank you. That was
Yes.
great. That was great. So, and I'm looking at the chats here. Like one person said, I think Jesus was messing with his disciples. And Claudia, and welcome Claudia. Claudia said he didn't call her dog. Actually, so let's go back to the text, and we're going to notice what was said. Okay, so read the text here, and notice what it says. The woman says, have mercy upon me, son of David. My daughter is severely demon possessed. He answered her not a word. His disciples came and urged, saying, send her away, for she cries after us. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then she came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. And she said, yes, Lord, even the little dogs, yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Now, where does Jesus mention Israel? Which verse? What's there?
In 24, verse
Verse,
24.
verse 24 is where he mentions Israel. And in verse 26, he said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Does Jesus actually call her a dog? And the answer is no. Nowhere he calls her a dog. Jesus makes a statement. It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. But he actually never, in this version or Mark's, he doesn't call her a dog. Nowhere. Okay. This is an inference that people tend to make from the text, meaning they infer, they think this is what Jesus is saying, but he actually doesn't call her a dog here or in Mark's version. He doesn't call her a dog. Now, people assume that but he says it's not good to take the children's bread. That's talking about Israel. He talks about Israel in verse 24, but he doesn't mention Israel in verse 26. He just says it's not good to take the children's bread. We are inferring that he's talking about Israel, but he doesn't say Israel are the children and you, the Gentile woman, you're a dog. He doesn't say that. That is what we have read into the text. And all the different, and this is why people struggle with this, because it does seem like on the surface, Jesus is calling this woman a dog, though. Right, it's plain, but he doesn't call her a dog. He makes a statement. It's not good to take children's bread and throw it to little dogs. That's all he says. And the woman agrees. Now, there are those who read this and say, well, yeah, she agreed because she accepted that she was a dog and that all that she could get was the little crumbs. I go, well, that would be insulting. But I don't think that's what the woman is doing either. Okay, so let's go, Mike, then what is the verse talking about? Would you all like to know what this verse is talking about? Okay, we'll come back next week. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, so let's move on. What is this woman talking about? Remember, here's the principle. We got to pay attention. We need to be aware of and pay attention to what is the text saying and what is it not saying. Okay, so when we look at this, I've highlighted some things. The woman, so this is some things we want to be aware of. Jesus says to the woman, and somebody said he didn't call her a dog, it's a metaphor. Yeah, is it a metaphor? No, I don't think he's actually using it as a metaphor here. I heard somebody say that today, one of the things I was listening to. And we're going to get into this, why I don't think it's a metaphor. He's actually stating something very important. So number one of the things we need to pay attention to is in verse 21, the woman says to Jesus, this Gentile woman, a Syro-Phoenician, a woman of Canaan, Mark said she's a Greek. She says, have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. That's important. Then it goes on in verse 24, Jesus answered and says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Verse 25, then she came and worshiped him again, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it's not good to take this children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. That's important, so I highlighted that. Verse 27, yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. And then Jesus said, oh, woman, great is your faith. Now, what people tend to pay attention to is primarily that Jesus said, I'm not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and the fact that he said that it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to dogs. That's what most people tend to focus on. Everything else gets erased, except maybe the woman saying, but the little dogs get to eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. But there's so many things in this that's important that gets left out, and we don't focus on it again. So here's a couple of things. These are some things we need to be paying attention to. This Gentile woman is calling Jesus Lord and Son of David. She cries out, Lord, have mercy on me. Jesus says, this is what we need to pay attention to, be aware of. He talks about the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Jesus said it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. The woman says, Lord, help me. And the woman says that the little dogs eat of the crumbs of the table. And Jesus says, woman, great is your faith. In Mark's version, he says, for this saying, go your way, your daughter is healed. So let's start getting into this. So once we have looked at the passage and become aware of and paying attention to the different, what the passage is saying and not saying, we also need to start, we have to start to explore the different contexts of this passage. When reading the Bible, there are different contexts that you need to consider, that you need to talk about. Somebody says, isn't he speaking to the disciples who's asked him to send her away? He would be speaking, yes, to the disciples and to the woman, I would say, who was there. Okay. When reading the Bible, there are different contexts you want to consider. There is the historical context, what's going on at that time, what are the events in the world that might be impacting this text. You want to look at a cultural context, which deals with beliefs, practices, rituals, customs of the time of the people. A linguistic context. This deals with the original languages in which the Bible was written. And then there's a literary context. There's things like genre. There's different genres of scripture. So you've got different types of literature within the Bible. It's not all the same. You've got history, you got poetry, you got wisdom literature, you've got narrative. You got to look at all these different genres because these all impact how we're going to read the text. We also have to look at what's known as the rhetorical aims. When an author is writing, there's something that the author is trying to accomplish. So what are the strategies that the author is using? We want to look at why did the author write what they wrote? What's the train of thought of the author? These are all things that we have to think about. And a lot of times when we're studying, we don't, or when we're reading, we don't think about that. We just read. But there are contexts that you have to, it's kind of like when you go to certain movies have a certain context. You don't go to a horror movie in order to laugh. If you want to laugh, you watch a comedy. But if you want to be scared and you enjoy that type of thing, you watch a horror movie. Or if you want to feel love, you watch a romantic comedy or a romantic movie, right? So different movies are going to have different contexts and they're going to produce different results. In the same way, when you're reading the Bible, you've got to think about what are the different contexts, because that's going to influence how I read the text. Another context is what that I call the Torah as a context. How does what is said in the New Testament and in the writings of in the teachings of Jesus, how does it reflect the wisdom and the teaching of the Torah? Okay. So these are all the different contexts. You've got to consider different contexts. So in this study, we're going to look at 4 contexts. We're going to look at cultural, beliefs, practices, rituals, customs. We're going to look at linguistic, language, the original language. We're going to look at literary. And literary deals also with what was said before, what was said after. And we're going to look at the Torah. How might the Torah inform us as to what Jesus was communicating? Okay. So first one is cultural context. And I said before, a Jewish context. One of the things that scholars have noticed about this passage is that this woman uses Jewish terms and terminology. She's utilizing Jewish terms. Matter of fact, I heard one person say that. I thought, wow, he got it. He goes, this woman sounds very Jewish. And that's because of some of the things, like she says to Jesus, and we read this is why I highlighted it, Lord, have mercy upon me. Lord, help me. Now we read that and we just thought, well, this is just a mother in trouble. But actually, when you go to the Torah, remember we said Torah is context? We see, like in Psalm 6:2, it has the words, have mercy on me, O Lord. Okay? O Lord, heal me, for my bones are troubled. Psalms 9 says, have mercy on me, O Lord. Psalms 30, verse 10, hear, O Lord, and have mercy on me, be my helper. Psalms 31:9, have mercy on me. Guess what? Now, these passages that I'm reading to you from the Psalms, they are written in Hebrew. But there is another version of the Hebrew scriptures called the Septuagint, which is written in Greek. Okay? The Septuagint, what is interesting, when they translate this into Greek, the words where the woman said, Lord, have mercy upon me, the same words are being used here in Psalm 6:2, Psalms 9, Psalms 30, and Psalms 31. They're using the exact, in Hebrew, it's basically one word. They're using the exact same word. And this is what it's called. Scholars who know the original language, they go, wow, this woman is utilizing text from the Hebrew scriptures that were written in Greek. So this has caused some people to say, wow, this woman sounds very Jewish. She's using Jewish terms. She's using Jewish terminology. So that's looking at linguistics and cultural context. Everybody with me so far? Make sense so far? Okay, following me? All right, so we see that. Here's another Jewish cultural context. The woman cries out, have mercy upon me, O Lord, son of David. Now, for years, the one thing that always puzzled me is, why is this Gentile, quote, pagan woman calling Jesus Lord and son of David? If she's a Gentile, why is she calling him son of David? Son of David is a royal messianic title that the Jewish people used. It's not one that the Gentiles use. They would not refer to Jesus as the son of David. Why? Because that's a royal messianic term. It would mean that he's the king. Why is this Gentile woman calling Jesus king? That always puzzled me. And I knew there was something there. Took me a few years before I could learn what it was. All right, so let's move on here. This is another context. She calls Jesus Lord, and she calls Jesus by a royal messianic title, a kingly title. But this woman is a Gentile. She's not, quote, Jewish. She was not born as Jewish. Remember, she's a Canaanite. She's a Syro-Phoenician, but she's calling Jesus king. Why is that? Now, remember I said that you've got to pay attention to what's there and what's not there. How many of you ever noticed that before? Or how many of you now, as you're reading it, you go like, yeah, Mike, why is she doing that? All right. So part of this, what this seminar is to do is to make you go, we're going to tie this all together though. So these are things that we have to look at. This is the Jewish cultural context. So in terms of the word Lord, where she said, Lord, help me. There is a scholar by the name of David Flusser. He wrote a book, and I hope you all like this slide because I did this. I put that little picture up there. And I was so proud of myself. But David Flusser wrote a book called, David Flusser was a Jewish scholar. He worked at the Hebrew University in Israel. He's considered one of the foremost experts on Jesus, and he was Jewish. He wrote a book called Jesus. I have it. This is what the cover looks like. And he says in his book, he's passed on, but he says, quote, Jesus was addressed as rabbi only by outsiders, those numbered among the inner circle of his followers, and those who came to him in time of need addressed him as Lord. Apparently, this is the title he preferred. So notice this, those who were part of his inner circle of his followers and those who came to him in time of need addressed him as Lord. So one of the things we do know, this woman definitely was in a time of need because her daughter was demon possessed. All right. So this is one of the reasons she addressed him as Lord. But again, this would happen by those who are either his followers or those who are in need. When you go and you read the Gospels, this is actually what you see. So if you remember the story of the Roman centurion who had a servant who was sick, he refers to Jesus as Lord. Okay, he refers to him as Lord because he was in a time of need. Now, what about the son of David? She called Jesus son of David. Now, this is something, again, this is when we talk about the Jewish context, the cultural context, the customs, the practices, the beliefs. Here was one of the beliefs about the term son of David. In extra biblical writings, Solomon, who was literally the son of David, was portrayed as a healer and an exorcist of demons through wisdom and magical means and incantations. So Solomon was seen as a healer and as one who could cast out demons. There is another Jewish work called Pseudo-Philo. This is a Jewish work, and there is a prophecy in this work where David, as he's playing a psalm to rebuke the demon that was troubling Saul, that Jewish work prophesied that there would be one born from his loins who would rule over the demons. In other words, a son of David would come who would rule over the demons. So they're developed in Judaism by the time we get to Jesus, this idea that the descendant of David or the son of David would have the power to heal and he would have the power to expel demons. Everybody follow me so far? So this is so if you and I lived in the first century of Jesus and we heard the term son of David, we would associate that with, oh, the son of David can cast out demons. The son of David can heal. That's one of the meanings that we would give to it, as well as he is the Messiah, he is the king. We see this Jewish thought, we see this concept of son of David as healer and as one who can expel demons. We can see in the gospel that this is pretty well known. So we're not going to turn there, but I'm going to just quote to you some passages. So blind Bartimaeus, who was sitting on the road, and he heard that Jesus was passing by, he calls out, Jesus, he says, son of David, have mercy upon me. He uses that Jewish term again, have mercy upon me, but he calls Jesus son of David. What is he wanting? Jesus to heal his blindness. Jesus did that. So he uses the same word as the Syro-Phoenician woman, son of David. This is in Mark chapter 10, verse 47 through 48. Son of David, have mercy upon me. Matthew chapter 9, verse 27 talks about two blind men calling upon Jesus as son of David. Come and heal us. Matthew 12:22. When the people see Jesus healing and delivering a blind and mute man who was demon possessed, they all ask the question when they see this man being delivered, could this be the son of David? Why do they ask the question? They see the demon being cast out and the man being healed. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 30 through 31, there's two more blind men near Jericho where Jesus is walking, and they call out to him, Son of David, have mercy upon us, come and heal us. And then one more, Matthew 21, verses 9, verses 14 and 15, Jesus is called Son of David in Jerusalem. And this is in connection with him healing the blind and the lame. So in the Gospels, we see the term Son of David being connected with healing, being connected with deliverance. But here's the thing that's interesting. In the Gospel, all the people referring to Jesus as Son of David, they are all Jewish. They are all Jewish, except for one person, and that's the Syro-Phoenician woman. Everyone else who refers to Jesus as the Son of David, they're all Jewish because this is a Jewish concept. They call Jesus the Son of David because they know that Jesus is the one who brings healing, who brings deliverance. But they're all Jewish except this one woman. Now, I want everybody to take their index finger, place it on your chin, and I want you to go, why is that important? You're going to see why that's important in just a moment. Stay with me. Okay. Is this enlightening so far? This is interesting so far. Okay, good. All right. So let's look at it a little bit more. So once we have become aware of what the text is saying, we discovered some of the context and we start applying some of the different contexts. Here we looked at linguistic. We've looked at language. We've looked at also the Jewish context. We looked at the meaning of Son of David in the first century. Then we need to start examining the text. And the text here that we're going to be looking at, of course, is Matthew chapter 15. We need to start examining it in light of the context that we've been talking about. So we're going to examine the text in light of the Jewish and linguistic context, and in light of the Jewish context. And what do we see when we do that? So what we see when we consider the fact that this woman is using Jewish terminology, have mercy upon me, Son of David. Lord, help me. This is Jewish terminology. She appears to know about the Son of David as one who heals and expels demons, because keep in mind, her daughter is demon possessed. And she doesn't just say, Jesus, help me. She says, help me, Son of David. Right? Does she know about the prophecy in Syro-Philo? Don't know. Maybe she does. We don't know for a fact. Okay. Number two, by calling Jesus Lord, she's expressing her need for help. And then number three, in calling Jesus Son of David, which is a royal messianic title, what she is doing is identifying with the people of Israel. Because it goes back to my question, why would a Gentile woman call Jesus Son of David, which is calling him Messiah, which is calling him King? Why would a Gentile woman do that? And I want to propose an argument, or propose that the reason she's doing that is because this woman is identifying with the people of Israel. Based upon what we've looked at this far, she's using Jewish terminology. She seems to know that Jesus as Son of David, which is a Jewish concept, not a Canaanite concept, it's a Jewish concept. He can heal. She calls Jesus Lord, and she calls Jesus Son of David. She refers to him as the King. So I am arguing she is identifying with the people of Israel. Okay, so moving on here. Now we get a new perspective. We get a new perception of the story in light of the Jewish context that we've explored. And what is it? This is what I want to propose to you. This woman is not an ignorant Gentile. This woman knows Torah and she knows Jewish tradition. She knows Torah and she knows Jewish tradition. Okay, so and so, yeah, Marka said, is her husband Jewish? Could be. We don't know. We're not given enough information in the text, but Marka, there are some who have suggested maybe her husband was Jewish. Maybe her husband was Jewish and he died. But this woman seems to know a lot about Judaism. And then there's something else that we're going to go back and look at. This deals with linguistic and cultural. Do you remember in Mark's gospel, it says that she is Greek? Mark 7:26, the woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by birth. Why is this important? Now, what I'm arguing is that this woman knew Jewish tradition. She knew the Torah. The reason this is important because the term Greek may refer to her as a proselyte to Judaism. This woman may have been a Gentile who converted to Judaism, or at the very least, she is what is known as a God-fearer. There was this class of people in the first century who were known as God-fearers, and these were Gentiles. Now, you say, Mike, where do you get that from? Okay, so we go to the rest of the New Testament, and this is where we see Greeks in the New Testament in Jewish places. Acts 17, verses 2 and 4. Now, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Then Paul, as his custom was, went into them, and for 3 Sabbaths he reasoned with them from the scripture. Where is Paul? He's in a synagogue. What is he doing? He's reasoning with the Jews, explaining and demonstrating that Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ. And some of them were persuaded. Notice this, and a great multitude of the devout Greeks and not a few of the leading women joined Paul and Silas. I used to read this and think, why are there Greeks in synagogues? What are Greeks doing in synagogue? But notice they're called devout Greeks. These are what is known as God-fearers. Okay, let me read you one more. Acts 18, verse 4. And actually, you can see there are several scriptures in Acts that talk about this, but here's another one. And Paul reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded, notice this, both Jews and Greeks. John chapter 12, verse 12 through 20. It says, the next day, a great multitude that had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. Now, there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. There were Greeks who came up with the Jews to worship at the feast. And they came to Philip, the Greeks. Philip was from Bethsaida of Galilee and asked, saying, sir, we wish to see Jesus. These are Greeks who are asking to see Jesus. What are these Greeks? And this is the question I have. Why are these Greeks in the synagogue? Why are these Greeks going up to Jerusalem? These are God-fearers. Okay? God-fearers are people who, they were Gentiles, and they had come to faith in the one true God of Israel, and they believed that he was the true God. They were Gentiles, and they would keep as many as the commandments of Moses as they desired. And some of them kept so many of the commandments that you could not tell that they were even Gentiles anymore, because they lived such a such a Hebrew lifestyle. Okay? So this woman is a Greek. And I propose, and there are some scholars who have proposed that she may have been, well, let me go to my next slide here. These are my points here. So once again, when we start looking at all this evidence, this is a new perception and perspective based upon the evidence we looked at thus far. This Canaanite woman is Greek. She knows Jewish tradition. She calls Jesus son of David. She is in all likelihood a proselyte to Judaism, or at the very least, she is a devout God-fearer. She's not an ignorant Gentile who worships pagans, who worships other gods, not worship pagans, but who worships other gods. This woman identifies with the people of Israel. God-fearers would identify with the people of Israel. Their God, if you're a God-fearer, the people of Israel God, their God is her God in her mind. Their Messiah, their king is her Messiah and her king. Okay, because this is how a God-fearer thinks. Okay, in Hebrew, the term is Yireh Hashemayim. Okay, so this is all the evidence. So when we start to examine the scripture in light of all this evidence, this is a new perception. This is a new perspective that we get. How many of you that you're starting to see the woman a little bit differently now? You can start to say, yeah, I'm seeing her. Actually, let me just stop this for a second, so I can see some of you. Okay, here we go. I can see more of you now. How many of you, now that you've looked at this, how many of you would say, yeah, I'm seeing her a lot different than I did before, right? We're seeing her a lot different than before. Now, what does this?
The Greek part of that makes sense too, because of Plato and his teachings.
Yeah, I saw your point that he said it was only single God. That's what got him executed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I chuckled at. Okay. Suzanne had asked the question, could she have been part of the lost tribes yet aware of where her roots are from? Suzanne, where are you, Suzanne? I see you in here. I'm actually looking into that now. I've got some information. I'm not prepared yet till I examine the information. That could be the case, though. It could be the case. But I can't say it definitively because I just got the information, just started looking at it, and I got to study it out a little bit more.
Uncle
But
Mike,
yes, Aaron.
I'm sorry,
Hey,
but
Aaron.
she was a Canaanite, right?
Yes.
Canaanites do share a close bond with Israel when we talk, especially we talk about type of livelihoods, and also they share similar God in a sense. Israel worships some of the gods that they worshipped in Egypt, so you do have like a close bond with her being Canaanite, and then also with Judaism at that particular time. But
Yeah.
I'd love to see your research if she was from the lost tribes. That would be interesting.
Yeah, there's a scholar by the name of Jason Staples. He has written a book that deals with. Do I have the book here? No, I don't. I thought I had it up. Oh, actually, he's back here. It's called Paul and the Resurrection of Israel, Jews, former Gentiles, and Israelites. So this is a book I'm looking at his research now, and he has some interesting things that relates to the question that Suzanne just asked. But I haven't been able to get into it yet because I tried to. I just didn't have enough time. I thought, well, rather than speaking half baked, let me make sure I do my due diligence first. But trust me, when I do, I will talk about it. Okay. All right. So we're starting to see this woman differently now. Okay. So let's go back to our slides and let's start pulling some of this together in terms of how does this relate to what Jesus said to her. We're starting to see her differently. If we're seeing her differently, this means that we also need to start to see differently what Jesus. So I want you to start thinking, okay, this Jesus did not call her a dog. Jesus said he's only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And by the way, some of the lost sheep of the house of Israel could very well be, it could apply to the 10 northern tribes. Okay. So Suzanne, you're spot on in terms of thinking that way. And this woman, like I said, she is either a proselyte to Judaism, she's a Gentile who is converted to the faith, which I think that's what she is, or she's a very devout God-fearer. And we saw that Greeks could be God-fearers. So I want to share with you some information. This is some more cultural information from a friend of mine. This is a scholar named Roy Blizzard III. He's a good friend of mine. He believes that the Syro-Phoenician woman was a convert to Judaism. He was the one who actually first led me in that direction and convinced me this woman is probably a proselyte or a convert to Judaism. Roy wrote an article called, and you can find this article online, it's called Yet the Dogs Eat of the Crumbs Which Fall from Their Master's Table. If you type that in, it should take you there. If you have a difficulty finding it, you can private chat me on Facebook and I can get you, or just chat me on Facebook and I can get it to you. But this is what Roy says in his article. He says, the Canaanite woman begs Jesus for help, and then Jesus totally insults her by calling her a dog. Or does he? What's going on here? Was she a literal dog that had to grovel and eat from the floor? Would it surprise you to learn that she was actually a Jewish proselyte? Now, let me say that Roy is an expert also in the Jewish roots of Christianity. His father, who just passed away, Dr. Roy Blizzard, was the one who got me into this study, and his father was an expert in the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. Now, Roy believes she's a Jewish proselyte who converted to Judaism. He bases this on the interaction between Jesus and the woman. The interaction, the conversation, the discussion that they're having. This is what led Roy to believe this woman is a Jewish proselyte. So let's start to look at it again. Roy believes that Jesus and the woman, we're going to do a little bit of reading here. It's going to get a little bit thick in terms of what we're going to be talking about, but I'll explain everything. He believes that the woman and Jesus were engaged in what is known as a Jewish halachic discussion. This is where you have a discussion about the law, the Torah, and how the law is supposed to be applied. Okay, and the word halachic comes from the Hebrew word halech, which means to walk. So Jewish halakha has to deal with how do you walk, how do you apply the Torah to your life, and Jesus, according to Roy, and I believe this is accurate, we're going to see why in a minute, he believes that they're having a halakhic discussion about food, what foods are clean and unclean, how food should be treated. And Roy cites what he calls a curious passage that's found in the Talmud in a Jewish work known as Berachot 52b. Now, in the Talmud is just a lot of, it's very expansive. Some people call it the Sea of the Talmud, and if you're not careful, you can drown in it. But fortunately, I've had good guides who guide me along the way. This is one tractate known as Berachot, or blessings, and it says this: Bet Shammai, who was a contemporary of Jesus, says that the floor is swept. Our rabbis taught, Beth Shammai says, the floor is swept and then they wash their hands. For should you say that the hands are washed first, the result might be to spoil the food. So in other words, Beth Shammai believes that you don't wash your hands first and then sweep the floor. You should sweep the floor, then wash your hands, because if you wash your hands, then sweep the floor, you might defile your hands, and this would defile the food. This would cause the food to be where it cannot be eaten. It's defiled now. Okay, so this is what this discussion is about. Now, I didn't put everything that Roy said in the article because it's a lot, but I put the points that are important to what we're talking about here. So it goes on to say, let me make sure I got the right slide here. Yeah. So it goes on to say here, what is the reason? Why are they talking about this? On account of, now notice this, on account of the crumbs of bread. Crumbs of bread. Does that sound familiar? Crumbs of bread? All right. Bet Hillel, however, says that if the attendant is a scholar, the one who's cleaning, he removes the crumbs, which are as large as an olive, and he leaves those crumbs which are smaller than an olive. This supports the dictum of Rabbi Yochanan, for Rabbi Yochanan said, it is permissible to destroy willfully crumbs of bread smaller than an olive. What is the ground of their difference? Okay, so you've got one rabbi who says, if an attendant is a scholar, he knows that the crumbs which are as large as an olive, you remove those, and you can leave the crumbs which are smaller than an olive. Rabbi Yochanan said it is permissible to destroy willfully crumbs of bread smaller than an olive. But what's the difference between the two? What's the difference that makes the difference? So Roy goes on to say, who would know the difference between crumbs of the size of an olive and those of a smaller size? Who would know the difference between the two? And Roy said this is probably a meal of havarim. The word havarim that it talked about here, it refers to a haver, or what's known in this is a Hebrew term, a fellow or an associate. This would be like your peer. These peers are meeting together. These are scholars there, and they call one another haver, fellow, associate, friends. But these are people who would gather together to study. I know one of my teachers and mentors, they used to have what they call a havarim, and it was the idea of gathering together to study. Okay, so this is probably a meal that they're talking about as a meal of people who study, as opposed to what's known as an am haaretz. An am haaretz. Now, what's an am haaretz? Again, another Jewish term. This is so I'll explain that in a moment. A haver is one who is scrupulous in the observance of the law, particularly in relation to ritual cleanness and the separation of the priestly and Levitical duties. Okay, so the haver would know the difference between a food that's the size of an olive that should be taken away because it can be used again, and food that's smaller than an olive, which can be left or could be disposed of, okay, or used for another purpose. And we're going to talk about that purpose. That's a haver. They're very scrupulous. They're knowledgeable about the Torah. And am haaretz literally means people of the land. These are country people, or these are illiterate or uncultured men or people. This is the name given in rabbinic literature to people who, through ignorance, were careless in the observance of the laws of Levitical purity and of those relating to the priestly and Levitical gifts. In this sense, they were the opposite to a haver. So a am haaretz, uneducated person, they were careless in ritual purity and being pure and clean. They were careless about that. They could make things unclean because they weren't scrupulous and very focused on making sure that they kept the laws of clean and unclean. Okay, but a haver would know the difference. They were very, very rigorous, and they were very, very scrupulous about that. Okay, so now why do I read all of that? Here's the reason why. We're going to get into this. So going back to the rabbinic literature, in the Mishnah, this is Berachot again, Bet Shammai said, one may remove bones and nutshells from the table. But Bet Hillel, this is another school, rabbinic school of thought, Bet Hillel says, one must take away the whole board and shake it. One may remove from the table crumbs less than the size of an olive and the panacles of beans and lentils because they are food for animals. Notice what it says here. One, and I highlighted it, one may remove from the table crumbs less than the size of an olive, and the panicles of beans and lentils. Why can you remove them? Because they are food for animals. So food that's smaller, that are crumbs, that are less than the size of an olive, they are food for animals. Okay? So this discussion in the Mishnah is about making sure that food is not defiled. In other words, that the food doesn't become non-useful for human consumption. And it's about, what do you do with the crumbs? Well, you have to look at, are these crumbs the size of an olive or smaller than the size of an olive? If the food or the bread is larger than the size of an olive, that food is to be removed. It is to be stored. But if it's less than the size of an olive, that food can be swept. It can be swept on the floor, because this food is food for animals. Does this sound familiar to anyone at this point? Think about what the woman said to Jesus. Okay? Let me read you a few more things here. So what we see, this is from Roy's article. Here we see in this passage from the Talmud and Mishnah what is happening in our story in Matthew. It is a complex Jewish pairing between Jesus and the Canaanite woman. Jesus perceives that she is not a pagan by her address to him. She calls him Lord, Son of David, and that she perceived that she is not a pagan by her address to him and by her response to his statement. He knows she is a proselyte who has been studying the law, and she recognizes the Messiah of the Jews when she sees him. He tells her that he only deals with the lost sheep of the house of Israel. She proves she is part of this by demonstrating her knowledge of Torah, or her knowledge of the law. So this woman, they're having a discussion about, what do you do with food in the household? This is a domestic, this is dealing with the domestic laws. And in Judaism, women would be instructed in the Torah concerning the domestic laws that of how they are to govern their household. So when this woman comes to Jesus and says, Lord, Son of David, she's making a claim. I am of the house of Israel. Jesus is not in the interaction with the woman, like we said at the beginning, he is not calling her a dog. He's not calling her a dog. The woman is not accepting that she's a little dog in an act of humility so that her daughter can be healed. There are those who have said that. Again, not trying to make fun of that, but there are those that said, well, this woman just accepted as an act of humility that she was a dog or sinner, so her daughter would be healed. What Jesus is doing when he interacts with her, the woman says, Lord, help me. He doesn't answer her. And then the disciple says, send her away. And he really doesn't answer her, but he says, I am not sent but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He is testing her claim that she is a part of the house of Israel. That's what she's doing. And she made that claim by saying, have mercy upon me, son of David. She's using Jewish terminology. So she's claiming, I've identified with the people of Israel. I'm a part of Israel. And Jesus says, I'm only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. I'm only sent during this time in my ministry to the people of Israel. Let's see if what you are claiming is true. Let's see if what you're claiming is true. And how does he test it? He tests her knowledge of Torah and Jewish halakha. And this woman
May I ask a quick question? And,
yes.
And it's just Mark, by the way, Mike. A is my middle initial.
Oh, okay. All right.
So in the previous slide, where we were talking about the different classes of Jewish people and the people of the land, and were you saying that the illiterates really didn't understand this rule about the crumbs?
The Am Haaretz, they may not have understood about it. Yes.
So I'm going to just kind of throw out this observation that most of the disciples had an illiterate background. So would that mean that they weren't really following the discussion that was taking place?
No, and when we say illiterate, the main idea of the Am Haaretz, because all the Jewish people, and I'll say this briefly, all the Jewish people were educated in the Torah, but some, let's put it like this, they did not apply it rigorously, and they probably sometimes just didn't pay attention. They're like, I don't care, and they didn't follow it. The disciples would have been educated, so when we say illiterate, only 20% of the people in the first century, both in Jewish and Greco-Roman world, only 20%, and that's a very conservative number, could read. So many people were illiterate, but that doesn't mean they were uneducated.
Got it.
Got it? Okay. Great question, though. Great question. So here's the thing. This woman passes Jesus' test. He's testing because he says, I'm only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This woman is claiming to be part. And so Jesus gives her a test. And he turns around and he says to her, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to dogs. And the woman responds, yes, Lord, but the dogs can eat of the crumbs that fall from the table. This is why I say this is not a metaphor. They're having a halachic discussion about what do you do with food. In Jewish tradition, if you convert to Judaism, you have to accept and submit. You have to make a confession that you're going to not only obey the Torah, you're also going to obey the oral traditions of the sages of Israel. That was one of the requirements, one of the criteria. Matter of fact, this is what it says. This is the rabbis on their condition for accepting a proselyte. The stranger, now in the Old Testament, the Torah, they would talk about the stranger a lot. By the first century, the stranger was seen as the proselyte. And they said the stranger or proselyte who dwells with you shall be unto you as one born among you in Ezra, and you shall love him as yourself. And Ezra is a homeborn, it's a native Israeli or native Israelite. The proselyte, the one who converts to Judaism, is as an Ezra, a homeborn. Even as the homeborn of Israel accepts the obligation of all the words of the Torah, so does the proselyte. So they say a would-be proselyte who is willing to accept all of the words of Torah, notice this, except one, is not received. Now in Judaism, they count it as their 613 commandments. If a person says, I'm going to keep 612, but this one, I'm not going to accept, they are rejected. Rabbi Yosef ben Judah said, even if it be a small matter of the minutia of the scribes, this is talking about their teachings, their oral traditions. He said, even if it's a small matter, and if they reject that, they are not to be accepted. Okay? So both Torah and the oral tradition of the sages were accepted by the proselyte. Even in small matters, they were to accept it. Now, of course, there's nuance to that. And in the first century, all of the oral traditions were not codified as it was after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. In Jesus' day, it was much more fluid, and people disagreed about what oral traditions you should follow and those you should not. And Jesus gets into debates with people over oral tradition. Some he agrees with, some he does not. So both Torah and the oral traditions of the sages were to be accepted by proselytes, even in small things. And this is what the Syro-Phoenician Canaanite Greek woman does. She accepts even the oral traditions. She is accepting the ruling of the rabbis on the verse of scripture, Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19 and 20. What does that verse say? When you besiege a city for a long time, while making war against it to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. If you can eat of them, do not cut them down. Now notice that if you can eat of them, do not cut them down to use in the siege, for the tree of the field is man's food. Only the trees which you know are not trees for food, you may destroy and cut down to build siege works against the city that makes war with you until it is subdued. So they were commanded in the Torah to not destroy trees that provide food. This is a principle in Judaism known as Baal Tashchit, and Baal Tashchit means do not destroy. Do not destroy. This is a principle. So let's talk a little bit about Baal. So this is going back into culture again, all right? And the Torah as a principle. This principle of not destroying trees was extended by that provided food. This principle was extended by the rabbis to prevent the senseless damage or waste of anything. The rabbis expanded this to say, if it's true, this is the way the rabbis would argue, if it's true that you should not destroy trees that bring forth food, how much more is it true that you shouldn't destroy other things that benefit mankind? So things like clothing, oil, food. There was a prohibition against destroying and wasting that which was beneficial to mankind. There was a much later rabbinic work known as Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch means the book of education. Now, this is a 13th century rabbinic work, but the reason I put it up there is because of what they say, because I think it does reflect the earlier mindset of the Jewish people. And it says this is the way of the pious and people of deeds, or the righteous. They will not waste even a mustard seed in the world. And when they are distressed by any waste and destruction that they see. So in the Jewish mind, righteous people do not waste things. This principle was to teach the Jewish people to respect food and to not treat it lightly or disrespectfully. This is the principle of Bal Hashchit from Deuteronomy, as we said before, from Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19 and 20. Okay, so how would you disrespect or treat food lightly, and how would you waste it in Judaism? One of the ways that the sages taught was you could waste food and disrespect it or treat it lightly by throwing it. By throwing it. So here's a quote from another rabbinic work, Ta'anit 24b. Rav Yehuda saw two people wasting bread, throwing it back and forth. He said, I can learn from this fact that people are acting like there is plenty in the world. This is one of the reasons you didn't waste food, because one of the attitudes of the people of the first century is that the world had limited goods. There's only so much to go around, so you didn't want to waste. Okay. He said, these people are acting like there's plenty in the world. So that's another cultural idea here. This is another quote from Berachot 50. The sages taught 4 things we said with regard to bread. What are the 4 things? 1, you may not place a raw meat on bread so that the blood will not drop onto the bread and render it inedible. 2, one may not pass a cup full of wine over bread, lest the wine drip and ruin the bread. 3, and one may not throw bread. And 4, one may not prop up a dish with a piece of bread. The basis for these laws is the need to treat bread with respect. Notice here, you may not throw bread. Okay? Here's another quote. You can waste bread by throwing it. And this is what one rabbi said. Although one may not throw bread, he may throw other food. Not throwing bread, what does that refer to? It refers to a food item that becomes disgusting or unclean when thrown. So so not throwing bread means that do not throw it, because if you do it, it becomes disgusting or unclean when you throw it. In other words, it's no longer can be used for food. Food that you can throw, this refers to a food item that does not become disgusting when thrown. And again, this is from the Talmud, all right? So what did Jesus say to the Syro-Phoenician woman? He answered her, Matthew 15:26. It is not good to take the children's bread and do what? Throw it to the little dogs. Why? Because if it is larger than the size of an olive, if you throw it to dogs who are already considered unclean, you throw it, the food becomes unclean. You have violated the Torah injunction of Bal Tashchit. You are now wasting food. And the woman says to Jesus, yes, Lord, even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Now, the word throw here, when Jesus said you're not to throw the bread, it means to throw or to let go of a thing without caring where it falls. In other words, Jesus was saying it is not good, and the word good, it can mean profitable or wholesome or right. It's not good to carelessly treat and throw bread and food to dogs, because this means that what is to be eaten by human beings becomes unclean. Jesus is stating the Torah principle. Now, what food is it that can be eaten by animals? What's the food that can be eaten by animals? The food that can be eaten by animals or by pets are foods or crumbs that are smaller than an olive, according to Jewish or rabbinic halakha. So it says, this is from the article from Roy, one may remove, and this is from the Talmud, one may remove from the table crumbs less than the size of an olive and the panicles of beans and lentils, because they are food for animals. What does the woman say? Yes, Lord, even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. The word crumb here in Greek is the word pisikion, and it means a small morsel or just a bit of bread or meat. So this is the bread that can be thrown or that can fall from the master's table. That word fall here means to ascend from a higher place to a lower place. So this woman was showing that she not only identified with Israel, and not only that was she a proselyte, but that she adhered to the Torah concept of Baal Tashit and the oral tradition of the sages in regards to Baal Tashit. She was showing that she was indeed faithful to God and to his Torah. This is what, and this is why, this is why Jesus becomes excited. But this, so it's not a metaphor, because I heard somebody else say that. I was asked that question today, but I heard somebody else, they said, let's see, Rosie said, is another translation of stranger also foreigner? Yeah, it can be foreigner. And by the time of Jesus and the rabbis and later, they started referring to the stranger as a proselyte to Judaism, because the proselyte was to have one law just like the Jews. The stranger was said to have one law just like the Jews. So they said this refers to the proselyte, the one who converts to Judaism. That's how they interpret it. Okay, so this woman is keeping the Torah. She's keeping the Torah, and she shows she's very faithful, even to the smallest bit. I'm going to show you a couple of more things here that I love. So the question becomes, why tell us the story? Why does Matthew tell us this story? Matthew is contrasting. Now, this goes to something I said before. When you are reading the biblical text, you have to look at the different contexts. Remember I said that earlier? One of the contexts is what we call a literary context. The literary context has several different aspects to it. One of them is you have to look at what was written before and what was written after. Another one is, what's the train of thought of the author? Okay. Matthew is contrasting the faithfulness of this proselyte woman with the unfaithfulness of the religious leaders of Jesus' day, the scribes, the Pharisees. Most scholars, many scholars, if not most scholars, they agree that one of the primary purposes of the Gospel of Matthew is to show Jesus' Jewish roots and to prove that Jesus is faithful to the Torah and that he is an observant Jew and that he is the Messiah. Most scholars of the New Testament agree with that. Okay, so one of the things you will often see when you read the New Testament and you read the Gospels especially, you will see, especially in Matthew, Jesus' faithfulness to the Torah is constantly being challenged by the religious leaders. And then Jesus in turn challenges their faithfulness to the Torah. And it ends with Jesus being the one shown to be faithful, and the religious leaders that he's engaging with, they are shown not to be the ones who are faithful to the Torah. Let me give you an illustration of this from Matthew 15. Matthew 15 is where we have the story of the Syro-Phoenician woman. What's the story that happens? We have this interaction. Matthew chapter 15, verse 1. Then the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus saying, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." He answered and said to them, "Why do you also transgress the commandments of God because of your tradition?" Now notice they're challenging Jesus. Jesus turns it around. Now he's challenging them. "For God commanded, saying, honor your father and mother, and he who curses father and mother, let them be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father and mother, whatever profit you may have received from me as a gift to God, then he need not honor his father and mother. Thus you have made the commandments of God of no effect by your tradition. Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." So the religious leaders challenged Jesus and Jesus' disciples in regards to their faithfulness to the Torah. Jesus turns this around and he challenges their faithfulness to the Torah. And this discussion is before the episode with the Syro-Phoenician woman. And also notice that this discussion has to do with clean and unclean. Why do your disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. If you go back and read the rest of it, you will see that Jesus is talking about the topic of clean and unclean. That's what they're discussing here. What's the discussion that Jesus is having with the Syro-Phoenician woman? It's about clean and unclean. It's about clean and unclean in eating. The discussion that Jesus has with the woman is clean and unclean where eating is concerned. You see, the train of thought is the same all the way down. If you read the passage before it and after it, it all connects. Okay, so Matthew is contrasting the two. We asked the question, why is Matthew doing this? He's contrasting the two. He's showing that not only Jesus, because remember, scholars have said, and I agree with this, Matthew is written to show Jesus is truly Torah observant. He obeys the will of his Father. Not only him, his followers do. So they're showing that not only Jesus, but those who follow Jesus are committed and faithful to the Torah. So this is why Jesus, now we come back again. Is everybody, and let me say this real quick. Everybody follow me? Because I said a lot. I know.
Yes.
Yes.
But is it making more sense? And is it shifting how you see the story now? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
But I want to bring it back into the context. I mean, because you made your point that this woman is a devout proselyte, that she really knows her stuff. But then let's bring it back into the context of the whole passage that you've read.
Right. So let's go back there again. Thank you, Charles. This is what we're going to do. So this is why Jesus says to the woman, now that we have all of these contexts, we start to look at the text anew and afresh. Jesus says to the woman, "Oh woman, great is your faith." Here's what I want to argue. Jesus is commending her, not so much for her faith in him, though yes, that would be a part of it. He is commending her faithfulness to God, as demonstrated in her devout faithfulness to even the smallest command of Scripture. Faith in Jewish tradition can mean faithful or faithfulness or faithful obedience to God or to his Torah in Judaism in this first century. In Habakkuk 2:4, everybody knows the just shall live by faith, right? You know that verse? Paul made it famous for us. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, this is the way that verse is interpreted. But the righteous will live by his faith. Its interpretation refers to all who observe the Torah in the house of Judah. So who are those who live by faith? It are those who are faithful to God by obedience to his Torah. They show their faithfulness to God by their faithful obedience to Torah. And this is from the book, Paul the Jewish Theologian by Dr. Brad Young. There's another Jewish tradition that says 613 commandments were addressed to Moses. Habakkuk came and reduced them to one: the just shall live by faith. This doesn't mean that Habakkuk came and said, oh, the only thing you got to live by now is faith. You don't need the commandments. It's the idea that all the commandments, when you sum them up, this is what they point to: being faithful to God. The just, the righteous are faithful to God. So this is why I say that what Jesus is doing, where this woman is concerned, is that he is commending and praising this woman's faithfulness to God, in contrast to the unfaithfulness of the religious leaders that we saw earlier in the passage. We can see this also in the commandments that Jesus is referencing or alluding to. Now, what in Judaism, commandments they are thought of as being light or heavy. You have light commandments, you have heavy commandments. And what determines if they're light or heavy generally is, what is the benefit that you get from it? Is it greater or lesser? Or what is the punishment you will get? Is it a heavy punishment or is it a light punishment? That determines if a commandment is seen as light or heavy. But both commandments, a light commandment or a heavy commandment, are to be obeyed. Bal Tashchit is a light commandment. It is considered a light commandment. Honor your father and mother is considered a heavy commandment in Judaism. Let's see what Jesus said about light or the least commandments. This is from Matthew chapter 5, and that should be verse 19, not verse 9. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But notice this: whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. If you do the least of the commandments, or let me finish. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that, well, let me say, first of all, the word Jesus said that those who do even the least of the commandments are called great, right? You see this here? Baal tashchit is a least or a light commandment. And the word great here, great in the kingdom, is the same word used by Jesus when he says to the woman, woman, great is your faith, or great is your faithfulness. Same word in Greek. She's obedient to even the least or the lightest of the commandments. So she is being honored by Jesus. And the religious leaders are shamed because Jesus, and we just read Matthew chapter 15, Jesus said, you teach people to disregard, honor thy father and mother. That's a heavy commandment. But we see this woman who's a proselyte Gentile, she's keeping even the smallest of the commandments. And Jesus says, those who keep even the smallest, they are great in the kingdom of heaven. So her righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes of Pharisees. And according to Jesus, this woman is a member of the kingdom. That makes sense to everyone? So where do we go? So is Jesus insulting this woman and calling her a dog? No. When we look at this in Jewish context, we see Jesus is doing the exact opposite. He is praising, he is honoring, he is celebrating this woman's faithfulness to his father's Torah. As a proselyte, or at the very least, a God-fearer, she is great. She's highly honored in the kingdom of God because she keeps even the smallest of the commandments. Okay. Now we have, let me ask this real quick before we go on. Number one, does this make sense? Okay. It makes sense to everyone. So you see, he's not calling her a dog. It wasn't a metaphor, and it wasn't about Jesus calling her a dog. He never called her a dog. He's talking about a rabbinic concept and how the household is to be run. And as the woman of the household, she would know the Torah and what the Torah prescribes as how she is to use her household. And by the way, elite Greek women did have dogs as pets. It's very possible that this woman had a dog. Okay. And if it was so, Jesus is testing her. It's almost like he's saying, so what do you do with the food when the dogs are around? And she goes, I'm not throwing. He said, because you cannot throw food to dogs. But she answers wisely, according to rabbinic tradition. She's not besting Jesus in an argument. She is not teaching Jesus something. She is showing, I understand the Torah. And she's proving, I am part of the people of Israel.
I think I have a question.
Yes.
Is it possible that I don't know how to describe what I'm saying, but I'll do my best. Is it possible this was almost like the first line of a nursery rhyme and she was repeating the second part of it? Or
that's a good way of saying it. Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
She's showing that she understands that's a great way of saying it. She understands the rabbinic ruling. She's done her homework. This is an educated woman.
Is it possible that is there a literary structure to what Jesus says and a literary structure to how she responds that can almost be like Jesus said the first half of a parable and she said the second half?
I saw something the other day where someone did see it as a chiastic structure. I don't remember where I saw it, but someone did. And a chiastic structure, folks, is just a way of ordering the material where it leads to a main point. So there may have been a structure to it. I have to look more into that, but there may be a very real structure to this in either Hebrew or in Greek.
Okay. And the other question is, and I know you're not this. We're almost out of time, and I realize, but this seems to fly in the face of what Paul says in terms of having to keep having to keep every little bit of what the law says in order to be accepted by God if we show faith.
Well, and I know, and people would say that, but when I would hear people talk about this, they would say, see, this woman, she could come and she didn't have to accept the law. We have to remember, this is before the cross. This woman is a Gentile. If you are a Gentile in Israel, how do you become part of the people of God? Before Jesus went to the cross, you become, and this is when I said before, we've got to read things in the context. So I've seen a lot of people, and Charles, you make a very good point. They take what Paul said and they read it back into this story. This is before Paul. This is happening before the cross. This is happening before the resurrection. This is happening when these things are still in effect. That's why it's so important that we read it within the context. And one of the contexts would be the timing. So this is before, and there were already Gentiles who had converted. It looks like this woman was already had become a part. And what Jesus was showing, and I'm going to talk about this next, he was actually giving this woman the opportunity to show that, yes, you truly are. You truly are the lost sheep of Israel that I have been sent to. And that is what this woman, and Jesus gives her, that's what she's doing. And Jesus gives her the opportunity to prove that. So let's go back to one more thing, and then we'll be ending up and wrapping up here. Okay, so why did Jesus seemingly ignore or reject the woman 3 times? That was something that puzzled me. And when I first taught this, I was reflecting on it, because this is part of my series on who's the boss, women and men in biblical and cultural context. And I was teaching that Jesus elevates women. But then I'd read this passage, I go, it didn't look like he was elevating a woman here. But I started doing the research. I found out things from like my friend Roy. And then as I read this and I'm reading Jesus and he's not responding to the woman, I thought of a rabbinic passage I read that had to do with how to deal with Gentiles who want to convert to Judaism. And here's the passage here. It says, quoting Jeremiah 23:23, or based on Jeremiah 23:23, I am he who brings near and does not keep a man far off. This is based on Jeremiah 23:23. So when a man comes to you to be made a proselyte, and he comes to you with pure intent, draw him near and do not keep him at arm's length. And learn that if you repel him with your left hand, you must draw him near with your right. And act not like Elijah who drove away Gehazi. So one of the teachings of the rabbis, the idea here is that when someone comes to you wanting to be a proselyte, join the Jewish people, that they should not immediately be accepted as a proselyte. They are to be tested, but they're not to be tested to the point where they're driven away. And I thought to myself as that passage of scripture came to mind, I thought, could this be what Jesus is doing in Matthew 15 with the Syro-Phoenician woman, testing her identification with the people of Israel? So I went online, started doing some more research to see if any scholars did some work on this in a scholarly fashion. And sure enough, I found this book. It has become one of my favorite books. It's called Have Mercy on Me, The Story of the Canaanite Woman in Matthew 15:21-28 by Glennis S. Jackson. Now, this book costs $225. I do not yet own a physical copy of this book because I'm like, okay, a little bit outside the budget here. But I did many times check it out from the local theological library. In this book, Dr. Jackson talks about a rabbinic formulation for bringing Gentiles into the Jewish faith. This formula is based on Naomi and Ruth in the book of Ruth. And we see this happening, this formulation in chapter 1 of Ruth. And if we're not going to read it, but if you can go back and read it for yourself. In chapter 1, Naomi tells her daughters, their husbands have died, her sons. She tells her daughter-in-laws to return to their people. Their people are Moabites. Orpah and Ruth are not Israelites; they're Moabites. Oprah talks with Naomi, and she goes, "No, I'm going to stay with you." And she goes, "Am I going to give you sons when in my old age?" She goes, "No, I want to stay." She goes, "No, you need to go back." She rejects her twice. She goes back to her people. Okay. But Ruth refuses to leave her mother-in-law. She absolutely refuses. And if you go back, you read the story, 3 times Naomi tries to convince Ruth to leave. And each time she refuses. And eventually she declares her allegiance to Naomi and to the God of Naomi. In verse 16, she says to Naomi, "Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God." She declares her identification with the people of Israel. So after 3 tries, after 3 times of trying to get Ruth to leave, verse 18 says about Naomi, when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her about leaving. This 3-fold formulation became a model for the sages of Israel for how to deal with potential proselytes to Judaism. So let me show you. This is what they taught. 3 times it says return in Ruth chapter 1. According to the 3 times, one must repel him who seeks to become a proselyte. But if he continues to press to be received, then they receive him. But Rabbi Isaac, quoting Job 31:32, which says the stranger or the proselyte did not lodge in the street, said, always repel with the left hand and draw near with the right. Now, what is this talking about? And by the way, this is from a rabbinic work known as Ruth Rabbah. Okay, and this is from a book I have called Rabbinic Anthology. And this is what Dr. Jackson, this is her argument in the book. She lays it out in detail. And she argues that this is what we see in Matthew 15 and Jesus' interaction with the Syro-Phoenician woman. Jesus ignores the woman 3 times. And after she makes, well, he ignores her 3 times after she makes the claim that she is identified with Israel and that she's part of the people of Israel. When she says, have mercy upon me, son of David, 3 times after that, Jesus ignores her. We can see the pattern here. It's maybe a little small, but you can see it here. Verse 23, after she says, have mercy upon me, son of David, he answered her not a word. Number 1, his disciples came and urged him, saying, send her away, for she cries out after us. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Number 2, then she came and worshiped, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Number 3, and she said, now notice she hasn't gone away. 3rd time, how does she answer? Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. And then Jesus answered and said, oh, woman, great is your faith. Or in Mark's version, for this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter. In other words, you have shown, what was Jesus' original saying? I am not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He is saying in verse 28, you have shown yourself to be a member of the house of Israel. He receives her as a member of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And her daughter is healed. So what Jesus did, he's following this rabbinic formula. He's also following the wisdom of the sages who said, if you repel with the left hand, draw them in with the right hand. Meaning what? Jesus gave her the opportunity to affirm and prove her claim. He did not allow her. Remember the one rabbi said, the stranger is not to lodge in the streets. What does that mean? That is, the stranger is not to remain outside. The proselyte is not to be an outsider. So Jesus allowed her to prove, I am an insider. I am a part of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And her answer to him proved that she knew the Torah, she knew halakha, she proved, I am an insider. I'm part of the house of Israel. And this is why, by the way, I didn't say this earlier. When you have, you notice she kept saying, Lord, help me. Lord, help me. This is known as prayers of lament. These are prayers in the Old Testament. These are prayers when people are for lack of a better way of saying it, they're making demands on God. Come and rescue us. Come and save us. This is what this woman is doing. Jesus, so everything she's doing, she's portraying herself as a member of the people of Israel. And Jesus said, okay, you're saying you're a member of the people of Israel. You're saying you're part of the lost sheep. Let me test you. Let me allow you to prove that you are. And she does, and her daughter is healed. So to recap, Jesus did not call this woman a dog. Absolutely not. She made a claim. She identified with Israel, that she was part of them. She was claiming to be a proselyte. She spoke to Jesus in Jewish ways. Jesus said his mission was to the lost sheep, but she was claiming to be a part of. Jesus, in rabbinic Jewish fashion, tests her by seemingly ignoring her 3 times. But he grants her the opportunity to show that she was indeed one of the lost sheep. He pushed her away with the left hand, but he drew her in with the right hand by his questions. They were engaged in a halachic discussion. And her answer proves that she is indeed part of the lost sheep to whom Jesus was sent, and her daughter is delivered and healed. There is a little bit more I could go into that where her daughter being healed is concerned. I'm going to show you where you can find a little bit more. But Jesus honors her devout faithfulness to God, and he shows that she is more faithful than the religious leader that Jesus had engaged with earlier. He is not denigrating this woman. He is lifting her up and honoring her before all. So The power of context. Studying this passage in its Jewish context, it opened up for us a treasure trove of interpretive riches that we couldn't see before. And everything that we read, and I hope you could see, is in keeping with the literary context, the cultural context of the day, as well as the linguistic context. It doesn't, and if you follow the line of thought, you can see each step of the way that what is talking about here is congruent and fits together. Okay? So before I go on, what do you think of that?
Mike, I have an honest reaction, an emotional reaction. And I've had this before and I've gotten through it, but my emotional reaction is sort of one of despair. Like, how can I understand any of scripture? That's obviously an overreaction, but it's like you with your 30 years of study, and not many scholars know what you just got through. Now, I don't think that this is probably a more difficult passage to find the meaning of, to tease out the meaning of. But is all of Matthew this way? I mean, that's what I'm trying to say.
What I would say is all of Matthew is set within a Jewish context. And the better we understand the Jewish context, the better we understand Matthew and Mark and Luke and John and Paul, though Paul also has the larger Greco-Roman world. The better we understand, and this is why I call this the power of context. And what Charles is saying, I'm going to tell you a little bit more in just a second. What Charles is saying, let me say this first. There's a little bit more about this that I didn't include because of time that deals with Jesus' words, be it unto you as you desire. So if you go to our YouTube channel, KICTV, look for the video on Jesus and the Syro-Phoenician woman. I teach this whole lesson and I go into a little bit more depth and detail. And there's even more in terms of what Jesus is saying about go your way, be it unto you as you desire. And I talk about why he says that to her in the light of the Jewish context. But the reason we call this the power of context, as I said before, is because so much, how many of you felt like, you felt like, man, it's like we opened up a treasure chest. Yeah, Catalini said, this is such a deeper and clearer understanding. Thank you. Yeah, so now you can know, and this is why I promised if you come, you would never leave here thinking of this passage the same way. And you may not agree with me, but you'll never think about it the same way again. But here's the thing. It opens up, we can see, wow, there's so much here. Now, Charles made a very good statement, and I've taught many places on the Jewish roots of Christianity. And when I teach it, people have often said, especially pastors and teachers, oh my gosh, I feel like I should never teach again. To which I say, you know what? Just keep teaching, keep learning. None of us knows everything. Like Charles said, Karen and I almost started 35 years ago. But what I'm sharing with you now, I only learned about 2 years ago. And it's because I was struggling with this text. I was like, this text has to make sense. So I really began to drill down, and I utilized certain techniques to help me to begin to understand the passage. That's what I want to share with you next. Let me share with you again. Let me bring this up. And this, hang on. Oops. Here we go. What I did here is I took you through a 5-step process known as ADEPT. Okay, ADEPT. We walk through each of these steps. When I started off, I said one of the things we need to be, so ADEPT is an acronym. The word ADEPT means skillful. And I walked you through each of these steps. This is a model I created for something else, and then I started applying it to studying the scripture. So number one, remember, number one. Step number two, we talked about different context, historical, cultural. Step number 3E, we examine the text in light of these different contexts. Step number 4, once we examine the text in light of different contexts, we say, hey, what new perspective and perceptions arise? What new understandings do we have? And then T is the tools. I share with you different scholarly works: Roy Blizzard III, Dr. Craig Keener, Dr. Brad Young, Rabbinic Anthology, Every Man's Talmud, the Talmud Online. These are all the tools, and these are all the steps that I went through in a list. And these are the steps I go through when I study. When I study, These are the steps I go through. Now, these are not just things I made up. I've studied books on how to study the Bible, and I've condensed them into these 5 steps for studying the scripture in more depth. So what we're going to do, as you know, and I said I was going to share this with you, we are doing a class called How to Study the Bible for a Change. In that class, we're going to go into much deeper depth for each step. Here I just kind of did an overview, but I walked you through every single step on the adept model. We went through every single one of them. In the class, we're going to cover things like, what are the questions you need to ask when you're studying? And what's the one question you need to avoid when you start studying? There is a question. There are certain questions you want to ask. There's a question you don't want to ask. But the questions are for the purpose to help you pay attention to what's there and what's not there. What are the different contexts that you need to consider when studying? And we're going to look at how the context you use will determine the meaning you get from a text. For instance, Charles asked a great question earlier about, does this contradict Paul? It really doesn't contradict Paul. What a lot of people I saw, because I listened to a lot of different sermons, they kept bringing in Paul to interpret this text. And it changed the meaning of the text. Like people would say, one of the things, because they would say, well, Paul shows us that we don't need the law to be saved. We don't need the law to be forgiven by God. My point again is that this text has nothing to do about eternal salvation and being forgiven and going to heaven when you die. It has nothing to do with that. But they would bring in Paul and they would start to say, and see what Jesus is teaching us here, and what Matthew is teaching us here is that we're all accepted, we all come by grace, but they were interpreting it in the light of Paul. So when they brought in that context, it changed the meaning of the text. And it left out, well, why did Jesus reject her? What is this saying about the dog? What does that have to do with? Oh, well, that shows that the woman accepted her state as a sinner. And that she accepted, yeah, I am a little dog, and Lord, if I only get the crumbs, and this is people literally said this, if I only get the crumbs, I will accept that. And so this shows her humility. But they were bringing in later theology from Paul and incorporating it in the text rather than reading the text and saying, well, what is Jesus saying here? So this is why we need to look at what are the different contexts that we're using. I see this all the time, by the way, when people study the words of Jesus, they keep bringing in Paul, and I'm going, Jesus precedes Paul and the theology that Paul, which is true theology, but that Paul was elaborating on. So we need to know what context, what are the contexts you need to avoid when studying, how to properly use the different contexts when examining the text. This is to provide guardrails and checkpoints. People can misuse context, cultural context. They can misuse it. I saw somebody on YouTube misuse a cultural context. So there are certain, and a friend of mine said, oh, who's a scholar, but she doesn't quite study in this way, but she just finished her PhD, or I think her MDiv, and she said, she posted on Facebook one time, this is why I get concerned about cultural context. And I wrote to her, I said, the problem is not cultural context, because the person that she pointed to, they did misuse it. I said, they didn't use cultural context precisely. They didn't follow the guidelines. They didn't establish criteria. And she said to me, yeah, Mike, that's what we need. And she's kind of hinting, that's what you need to do. You need to establish what are the guidelines. In the class, we're going to talk about this. How do you make sure you're not misusing it? What do you need to look for? And then we're going to talk about the tools. What are the what are the scholarly books, the articles, the websites that you can use both online and offline? We're going to talk about the fact that there are certain tools that you can use that are free. And I have collected them over the years and I've written them down. We're going to talk about the ones that I consider to be the best out there in helping you to gain new perspectives and perceptions of the biblical text. These are trusted ones that I really trust. We're going to talk about different books that I think should be a part of everyone's library. Oh, my wife posted in the chat part 44, the New Testament Christ and the Syro-Phoenician Woman. Thank you, dear. So go watch that video if you want the fullness of the teaching. You'll hear all of this. If you want to skip that all, you can just probably go about halfway through and then just listen 45 minutes in and then listen to the rest of it, because I go into a little bit more detail. But in this class, how to study, these are the things that we're going to be covering. Now, what we're going to be showing you what to do is how to think when you approach the text. the mindset you should have, the questions you should be asking. Trust me, you're not going to be coming from this class going, oh my God, I'm so confused. It is, it is helping you to learn how to think about the text. And it's helping you to build a nice foundation, to establish a nice foundation that you can build on. Like what Charles was saying today, he says, when I hear this, I get emotional. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't start here. This class that we're going to be doing shows you where my wife and I started. It's simple. And trust me, if you take this class, if you sign up for it, you're going to like, oh man, we love this class. This is because you will learn some really great principles, some great practices and tools. Somebody asked me, Mike, are you going to be showing people actually how to study? In the class, it's not a Bible study. It is a workshop. And if you sign up, you'll be broken into groups. I'll have you do assignments. You'll get homework assignments, but you'll also be provided with tools to help you to break down a text and look at, well, what is this text saying? And we'll be talking back and forth. So that's what we'll be doing in that class. We're also going to, the class is called How to Study for a Change. So we're also going to talk about how do you renew your mind to what you're learning? Because we're to be doers of the word, not hearers only. We become doers in two ways. Number one, the Holy Spirit. We got to walk in the Spirit. Number two, we have to renew our minds. Romans 12:2. So we're going to talk about practical steps that will enable you to renew your mind and walk in the Spirit. This class is going to start September 12th and is going to go into October 24th. So it's going to be about 7 weeks of this class. Okay, September, and it's going to be on Saturday evenings at this point. Okay. Now, after that class, we'll talk about price in just a moment because it does cost to go, but we kind of keep it as affordable as possible. After this class, beginning in October, we're going to take a break. And for those who still want to do it, we're going to start another class called The Jewishness of Jesus, an Introduction to the Jewish Roots of Christianity. That's going to start October 14th and last until December 19th. There'll be a break in between for Thanksgiving. But we're going to cover Jesus' Jewish background. We're going to look at Jesus' rabbinic methods of teaching. We're going to look at the Jewish background to many of Jesus' misunderstood sayings, like we looked at the Syro-Phoenician woman. We're going to be looking at other things, like if someone strikes you, turn the other cheek. What is Jesus talking about? Is he saying that you should be a pacifist and let people beat you up? Is he saying, when Jesus said, do not resist evil, if somebody breaks into your house, should you not do anything? We're going to look at that. We're going to look at the Jewish background to the Lord's Prayer. There's a background to that. And also, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, the kingdom of God from a Jewish perspective. We're going to talk about that. And one of the things we're going to look at is the verse of scripture. This is one of the, I think, misunderstood sayings. The kingdom of heaven suffers violent and the violent take it by force. Anybody ever heard that verse before? Yeah, I could tell you this, and I don't mean this, I hope this is not taken in an arrogant way. Most of the time I've heard this verse taught on, it's taught wrong, because it's not taught from a Jewish perspective. It's taught from a Western perspective. We're going to look at it from a Jewish perspective. And all of this, what we're going to be doing is the tools that you learn in the first class, how to study the Bible, you're going to see them applied in this class. And again, we're going to have more understanding and more insight. All right. So here's the cost for each class if you're interested. It's $97 for each class for the next 2 weeks. The classes are priced at $97. After August 22nd, How to Study for a Change will go up to $127 for 1 week. And then on August 29th, the workshop will go up to $147. But right now, for the next 2 weeks, is at $97 if you're interested. The Jewishness of Jesus class, also $97 until September 29th. September 19th, price goes up to $127. October 10th, the price goes up to $147. But we wanted to try to make this as affordable as possible for people. If you sign up for both classes within the next 2 weeks, you can get both classes, How to Study for a Change and the Jewishness of Jesus. I spelled Jewishness wrong there. You can get them both for $134, both of them for $134, which means you pay about $67 per class. You save $30 on each class. And as a bonus, you get unlimited access to each class for as long as our ministry exists. Or for as long as we're alive. In other words, as long as we're here, you get unlimited. So in other words, if you go through the class and then you will say, I want to go back through that class again. I want to go back and listen to some of the videos because they're all going to be on Zoom. We're going to record every class. You can go back. You'll have a link And hopefully our platform will be completely, we have a platform for this. It'll be completely set up by that time because Karen's been working on it. And when it's set up, you'll be able to go online and just listen for the class. Okay. Oops, I just did something weird here. There we go. Charles asked the question, what day of the week is the Jewishness of Jesus? Oh, Karen just put that up. Yeah, there it is on our Transform You site. Yeah, so these are the things that we're going to be talking about. And that's me. This is me at the beginning. Everybody see this picture? That's me in my early 20s, mid to early 20s, coming from Claremont, my very first day at Claremont Theological Library. And so this is me starting my journey of study. And when I went to Claremont Theological Library, you were able to check out 25 books at a time. I maxed my card out on the first trip. I was so excited. There are books that are on the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. Some of them I recognize, some of them I own now. But yeah, that's me in my early 20s, starting this journey. So when Charles says, you know, like you've been at this for a while, this was like literally almost the beginning right here. Thank Karen for putting that up there.
Mike, what are the dates? Is it started on a Tuesday? You say I think I read it says it's October 14th. That's just a Tuesday.
Is that a Tuesday? If it is, it's wrong. All the classes will be on Saturday. If I need to correct it, I will. Yeah, they're going to be on Saturday evenings. And if we need to, because I know we got some people that are in other parts of the world, and I'm actually thinking if that's true, we may do a class during the day for people who are, because we've got some people from Australia. I know somebody from London wants to take the class. So I'm thinking about we actually may do a class during the daytime, like early in the morning. So these people are not up at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to take this class. So, which we've had people do that. Okay, so somebody just sent me a note. So yeah, so let me go back to, thank you, Karen, for putting that up there. Let me go back to this for a second. So that's our not website. Our platform is called Transform You, and that's where we're going to be working out of. So again, if you sign up for both classes within the next 2 weeks, it's only $134, $67 per class. You save $30. You get unlimited access. And so here it is, $97 for How to Study for a Change until August 22nd, $97 for the Jewishness of Jesus until September 29th. Both courses, $134 until August 22nd, and unlimited access for life to all classes for the life of our ministry. So here are the links for it. And everybody who's on tonight, did you all receive an email from me? If you what I'm going to do, you can copy these links here, and or I can also send you all of the links and you notice each one here is for the different packages, the 97, 97, then the 134. Karen, is it set up on Transform You yet? It may not be set up yet.
No,
Not yet.
no, that's
Okay.
just, yeah, that's just the skeleton of it because we need to build
Okay.
out. But
But these links do work.
Yeah, those links work, and we'll get their emails once so I don't know if you have everyone's email. If you joined and you don't, okay, you have everyone's email. So
yeah,
we'll notify you when you can go in and access the site.
Yeah. So once the site is fully operational, it's just about there. My wife, we also work full time, so my wife she does double duty, and we have kids and grandkids. But Transform You will be the place where everything will be stored, and you'll have a password. You'll be able to go in. You can access things, and you can. Excuse me, you'll be able to always access the class whenever you want. So even if you pay the 97, let's say you pay for just How to Study for a Change, you pay the $97. You get unlimited access. The Jewishness of Jesus, if you pay $97, you get unlimited access. If you do the 134, you get unlimited access to both.
So Mike, it looks like some of the dates are a little off.
Are they?
Because you said it's Saturday,
Yeah.
September 12th, but it's actually September 13th.
Okay.
So
I'll go back and change that.
Yeah, so it'll be updated.
We'll update that. That
Yeah.
was my fault for writing fast.
Okay. And then the other thing too, as you're just as a wrap up, you know, that the way when we started out, and this is like before we had kids, before we had you know, we didn't even have a car, you know,
Yes.
and then we can share that story another time, but we were hungry, and it was you know, it was so beautiful to have this enter into our world. And I know Mike will be, you know, sharing, about all the different rabbinic writings and things that we did, that just I felt like I was coming into a middle of a conversation that I didn't know anything about. And that's what I feel like when you start studying the Hebraic roots of Christianity, it is truly like coming to a middle of a conversation. We came into the middle of a conversation when Jesus and the Syro-Phoenician woman, and we came into the middle of it. And so now with context, you was like, okay. And so it's actually, you know, coming with a really a spirit of humility, because we may not, what we think we know, we may not know. And to just really be humble, you know, when we're seeking to understand. So anyway, so it's been a journey. Is one of the best, I mean, life-changing journeys. I, of course, marrying Mike, you know, a part of that was part of making this journey, and it has absolutely transformed my thinking, the way I approach life. And I just can't even imagine my life in the mindsets that I was in from, you know, I was a PK kid, I was a preacher's kid. So I grew up in the church. And so to actually have a perspective, a different, it's just, I'd like, God, thank you. Thank you so much for rescuing us so early. That's it. So I'm really looking forward to you all. This is like amazing, you know, so just get ready for some gems. And what you said, Charles, like I feel like I know not like, yeah, it's kind of like the Colonel, you know, from Hogan's Hero. I know
nothing.
nothing.
Yeah, I did feel like that when we first started. I was like, oh my God. I literally said to myself, I got to go back and relook at everything I've ever been taught, which I have. And I still do it. You know, but like Karen said, it's been quite a journey. I got one more bonus for everybody. Here's the other one more bonus. If you invite someone to take this course and they sign up and pay in full, you will get a class for half off. Okay. So if you now you have to let me know, hey Mike, I sent so and so, they signed up. You'll get one of your classes half off. If you invite two people who sign up and they pay, you get one course for free. If you get three people to sign up and pay, you get both courses for $67. So if you get three people to sign up, you get it for $67. And so all of this will be in an email I will send to everyone. And I'll send you, we're going to check the dates. So look for it over the next couple of days to make sure the dates are correct. And again, the unlimited access still applies. So even if you apply the bonus, you still get unlimited access. But we wanted to make this to where you go, oh, we got to sign up for this. Here we go. So even if you invite a person and then they invite two people, they get access to all of this. Okay. So we wanted this to be as affordable as possible for people. So I just want to say thank you everybody for attending. And I look forward to seeing everybody in September for the first kickoff. And for those that said, when are we starting? I will send out the dates again to make sure they are accurate. I will double check with my wife, which is what I should have did the first time, but I will make sure I do so now to make sure that they are accurate and correct. But they will be on Saturday. If we get enough people that say, Mike, I can't make it on Saturday because of the time frame, especially if you are in other parts of the world, let's talk. We may set up a course maybe during the week in the morning if you can attend it. And so we are flexible that I'm willing to do that. Okay. I just want to say thank you to everyone again. I enjoyed this immensely. Could you tell? I love teaching the Bible. It's one of my favorite things, and especially teaching about the necessity of context. So thank you all very much for signing up. And for those of you that are going to sign up, and thank you everyone for coming And I hope this was enjoyable. I hope this was enlightening. And God willing, we will see you all in the first class, How to Study the Bible for a Change.
This was so good, Mike. This was great.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good stuff.
You
Thanks,
enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah. So next time you hear someone say, Jesus, call that woman a dog, like, no, 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 no.
Thank you, Pastor.
You are so welcome. We'll see everybody soon.
We love you.
Blessing.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mike.